Thanks to everybody for coming and learning a little bit about how the museum's been engaging in community science. I wanted to start by just kind of refreshing everybody's memory about what community science is. You might have not heard of it yet, actually. So not only refresh, but maybe introduce you to it. And then explain a little bit about how the museum's been engaging in community science programs for the last several years, some of the outcomes of those projects, and then hand it over to Devin, who will kind of introduce you to some of the immediate observations that we've had from the RVAir program and some hope for the future. So without further ado, first I wanted to also acknowledge the community science program that we've started to build here is reliant on many sorts of collaborations around the city, including Groundwork RVA, VCU, U of R, the City of Richmond Sustainability Office, the Virginia DEQ. So, we're really fortunate to have a lot of partners across both governmental and non-governmental organizations that really help us to better understand the data, and much of this is so new to us that we're learning just like the rest of you. So thanks so much for joining us, and looking forward to connecting about this. So what exactly is this term community science? You recognize probably two sorts of words in this description: community, meaning a group of people connected through some sort of value system, and then science, which is the capability of making observations of some sort of phenomenon and interpreting those observations in some sort of consistent scientifically rigorous way. So we follow kind of an evolving definition of what community science is. One definition was put forth in a paper that came out in April, which sought to explain community science in a few different ways. The kind of key tenets of community science being that it's community driven and community controlled. Now that's kind of a relative, like kind of a spectrum, from control being like total like ownership of both the methodology, the techniques, the technology, and everything there, or driven in the sense of answering questions that are informed by community knowledge. That then informs the second point, which is community science involves local knowledge, like, something about the neighborhood, something about a particular place or intersection, in the case of in our work, but then also collective action and empowerment, using that information to then do something positive in the neighborhood or in the community that might improve conservation, livelihood, or some sort of governance outcome. So that's the third point. And then the last two really focus on kind of broader scale things like environmental sustainability, some sort of an ecosystem-based management, largely community science projects like the ones that we've done here at the Science Museum tend to have that kind of leaning. And then ultimately, community science is about social learning, or a group of people kind of discovering something together, as well as incorporating some sort of internal or hired expertise. And so I wanted to give a little bit of a background shortly on how the museum has engaged in community science in the past, through the lens of kind of something that's retrieved a lot of attention recently and enabled us to then receive the funding to bring on the IMLS RVAir program that we're going to talk about at the end from Devin. And so this all starts with back in 2015 when we received a NOAA grant and brought me on back in 2016. We wanted to investigate the localized impacts of climate change, namely things like extreme heat and precipitation. On the bottom of this graph is the temperature at the airport, from 60 degrees, which is kind of where we're at these days, beautiful morning weather, to 120, which is really uncomfortable, not very safe. Up on this graph is the relative proportion or percentage of people that are going to the hospital for heat-related illnesses across the state. And so what you might think about in your head is, what do you think this graph even looks like? Is it something that as temperature goes up, people are getting sicker? Is it in the opposite direction? Or does it look something like that, which is like a dog leg. Clearly, intensifying extreme heat events are a risk to our public health. So we became interested in understanding more about, or wanting to understand more about, how extreme heat impacts our community at the kind of person by person, neighborhood by neighborhood level. Simply because we know that over 1,000 people sought emergency care for heat-related illnesses in Virginia back in 2019. And as summers become more intense, heat waves become longer and stronger due to human-caused climate change. This is something that we need to understand in order to build resilience, or the ability to absorb those stressors and adapt to them responsibly. So why else do we care about extreme heat? Well, it's truly a silent killer in the fact that extreme heat actually kills more people on average than any other heat, weather-related extreme, like flooding, tornadoes, and hurricanes, like what we're seeing with Hurricane Delta approaching the Gulf Coast. That might be surprising to you. So in order to do this also, we know that heat doesn't express itself the same way everywhere. And so this is where I need a little bit of help from our attendees. In the chat, there's a chat function. If you're able to use the chat, I would love if you would use your chat function to make a hypothesis. If we were to fly into this picture, where would you go to find the warmest place to the touch? On 3, I want you to write it into the chat. 1, 2, 3. See if people respond in the chat room. Maybe, ooh, I got some responses in private messages. All right, well, maybe if you're not so interested in making a hypothesis into the chat room, think about it in your head. Now, not just the warmest place, but think to yourself, where might the coolest place in this photo from the parking lot out in front of the museum might be? This we can actually investigate with the thermal camera from FLIR. It actually takes an image of the thermal radiation coming back towards the camera from these different surfaces all over our campus. So here, the brighter surface, or the brighter colors, are warmer temperatures. The asphalt here in the middle of our parking lot, somewhere around 160 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit to the touch. As little as as low as 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit to the touch underneath this mature oak tree. But there's a lot of variation across this landscape, and this plays out over the course of our entire city, as we know that some places of our city might have relatively more of these impervious or hard, dark surfaces than the more natural surfaces like the trees and grasses. Well, one thing that is interesting to me isn't just that the asphalt's really hot and the trees are really cool. It's that the non-native grasses that we have here are the same temperature as the sidewalk, which is pretty surprising. But then across the street here is a native plant garden for Virginia native plants. What's really interesting about that is that the difference between non-native plants and native plants is actually their root depth, allowing native plants to tap into reserves of groundwater, which are much deeper than the non-native grasses. So one last interesting thing are the colors of the cars here, and how those relate back to the temperature that's coming to the camera. Anyway, so we wanted to understand, okay, we know that these temperatures can vary really a lot across an urban landscape, but we don't know exactly by how much. And so we needed that expertise to join into this community science project. Vivek Chandas, Portland State University, figured out how to attach these really sensitive thermometers to cars and bikes, and then dispatch people all over cities during a heat wave to understand how much temperatures vary across the different environments. We then had to look more closely at our local landscape to find more expertise, including the City of Richmond's Sustainability Office, which is made up of 3 really amazing folks. who are working on the RVA Green 2050 plan, which is a equity-centered climate action plan for the city of Richmond. You can go to rvagreen2050.com to learn more about that. But also we needed kind of that local knowledge to inform our community science program. So that's why we brought in Groundwork RVA, which is a teen workforce skills development nonprofit, which is seeking to green Richmond, prepare youth for success, and realize racial equity, which are all those sorts of things that are part of including a community that wants to use information to advance particular governance goals for their community. And so this is a picture that was actually in the RTD during our campaign, which was in July 2017. Volunteers fanned out all over the city of Richmond during a heat wave. It was well over 100 degrees for several hours of this day, July 13th, 2017. This is a Jonna James, who's a sophomore at Open High School at this time, and part of the Groundwork RVA Green team, affixing this tool, this really sensitive thermometer hanging out of the window. It's kind of like a car flag, only without the flag and a hole in it that allows air to travel through it and us to keep track of the temperatures. What did we find? Well, the community scientists that were part of this program found a 16-degree Fahrenheit difference between the coolest and warmest place in the city. We know now through continued collaborations across different non-governmental organizations and as well as other governmental organizations that these hotspots are actually places that the ambulance authority here in Richmond goes to more often for heat-related illnesses. So we know now are working with the Virginia Department of Health to understand more about these patterns and the types of individuals that succumb to heat-related illnesses in our community. And the idea that that these community science projects kind of end up changing the way that our community views these sorts of issues. This heat island data has worked itself into several localized plans, including Richmond 300, the Richmond Land Bank's annual plan from back in 2019. Also now our community science program on heat is one of the examples of how to address heat islands and equity on the EPA's environmental justice website, which is really neat. We're like alongside New York and New York City on this website, which is really great. And then also in the most recent time period, this work has now been informing grant programs that are being funded throughout the city. So the Chesapeake Bay Foundation built on the work of the Science Museum's community science program to focus their attention on greening projects in formerly redlined communities of Richmond, specifically depaving areas around a church on South Side and planting trees with a couple community organizations. The Science Museum of Virginia is happy to report that we've actually been awarded a new grant from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to continue to deepen our role in building climate resilience with our community nonprofit partners, including Groundwork RVA, but also the Southside Relief, Virginia Community Voice, and Happily Natural Day. That's going to really present a huge opportunity for the city to continue to grow in the sense of centering community in the design and implementation of these things. So it grows out of our community science programs that this is, is actually changing the way that organizations around the city are collaborating with one another. It's the power of community science at work. And finally, I wanted to say that these things are also catching a lot of national news recently. If you haven't seen, the museum's work was featured in a New York Times article at the end of August. Talking about community redlining in the 1930s and 40s and how that has kind of set a trajectory for particular areas of our city to experience disproportionate exposure to climate stressors, particularly heat. Here's a map of the city, well, at least the areas of the city that were part of the HLC's redlining practice in the 1930s and 40s, basically saying along a spectrum of perceived safety for financial investment, particular areas of the city received red outlines and were denied access to things like homeowners loans and basically anything residential kind of investment. But this was mostly along racial lines in the city, where most of these communities at the time and even today remain largely Black and brown communities in the city of Richmond. And so what this map is showing us is that those areas tend to have more paved surfaces, which we learned earlier was related to that extreme heat. Also, there's kind of a disparity then in not only in the paved surfaces, but the amount of tree cover, with big differences in tree cover from neighborhood to neighborhood in the city, and these formerly redlined areas having relatively less. And then that relates directly back to the heat. We know that these areas and other places where extreme heat it tends to build up are also very close to major roadways. They're also potentially nearby kind of like industrial land uses. And so in some other areas of the country, these formerly redlined areas and more generally these hotter zones are related to relatively poorer air quality and other sorts of health-related impacts. And so what is the city now doing? Well, Mayor Stoney announced 5 new large green spaces to be developed on Richmond's south side, which is really exciting. We'll see these things be developed over the next few years with community input. That's really exciting. And really leads us to how we ended up receiving the funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services to advance this community science work. So we had these large impacts from our community science heat island campaigns that have now resulted in some very significant investment, both from federal money and now collaborations across the city of Richmond. So what we want and what we're hoping is that through the beginnings of this program, which is called RVAir, and the support from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, that we can build upon the success of our Heat Island campaign and learn how to use community science to answer other questions and inform other sorts of decisions and organizations around the city to become part of using science to advance better health outcomes and different policies for different communities based on their need and understanding of those stressors. So I'm going to stop speaking now and hand it over to my illustrious colleague, the community science catalyst for the Science Museum of Virginia and the manager of the RVAir program, Mr. Devin Jefferson. So thank you very much, Devin, for letting me speak.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffman. Thank you, Jeremy, for that introduction and for giving everyone some great context and a reminder about what we've been doing so far. So first of all, thank you for having me today. I'm happy to be here. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about specifically what we've been doing with RVAir and what we've been observing so far. But obviously, I want to take the time to thank all of our collaborators and everything as well. We're from, like Jeremy said, Virginia Tech, they're different VCU, U of R, Groundwork, RVA. None of this would have been possible. But the overview so far, you may know a little bit of detail, you might not, but we have 2 main methods for collecting our air quality data. One of them has been the Purple Air 2 sensors. Jeremy referenced that with part of our collaboration with U of R. They've been really good with allowing us to host some sensors there, but as well as other community partners that we're still adding more and more all the time. Right now, we're right around 30, almost at 30 Purple Airs installed across the city. And then the other way we're collecting data is through these community walks with our AirBeam 2 devices. And I'll explain a little bit more about both of these methods in a couple minutes. But what they're measuring is just a quick reminder, is talking about particulate matter in the air. And so when we're talking about public health, we're talking about the things that we can't see in this case, and these devices help us do that. So what we do is we're meeting at the museum, and we'll eventually start meeting in other locations, going to and from the museum to take walks around the communities in different areas, whether it's starting from the museum, starting from a place like Carver, Jackson Ward, so that we can eventually get more and more hyper-local data. Sorry about that, a little hot. But if you want to join us, you'll have plenty of opportunities to be a collaborator starting from here on out as well. We're going to be leading walks through the end of, I'll be leading walks through the end of October, but then we're going to start right back up in the spring when it warms back up. So if you didn't get an opportunity to participate so far and still want to, you can visit us at smv.org/air quality, learn a little bit more information, sign up, and hopefully I'll see you soon. But the more interesting piece, or some of the things that we want to talk to you about, or that I want to talk to you about today, is what we're finding so far. This is these two maps that you see on the right are from the Purple Air map website. Basically, these are the sensors that are being installed. They're fixed. All they need is Wi-Fi and a power source outside, and you'll be good to go. And thankfully, we have been able to we were able to see all of the purple layers that are scattered throughout the country. And if I zoom out in this map, you'll be able to see the rest of them that are connected to, that are online throughout the world. But as you'll notice, there's a lot of red on the West Coast. It's pretty dark. You probably can assume, and you would have assumed correctly, that is really, really high levels of particulate matter. In this case, PM 2.5. That's what we are usually looking at when we talk about air quality and for our conversations. And that's the smog, the smoke, the extra pollution from those wildfires that you can see going from red to yellow in certain areas across the country to green on the East Coast. And that changes day to day. This image on the top was from like yesterday evening, just for context, as well as the bottom image. The bottom image is from Richmond, and this is just an example of that hyper-local view that we can get from the data we're collecting. So now we can interpret, or at least say, we have a general idea that the particulate level matters in the Richmond area are in the upper 40s, things like that. Now, that's just, we're collecting this data, and then we're going to be able to, we want to be able to take that information, add context to it for what we're seeing on our walks as well. But we can see with the purple air sensors, for example, we can see things at a national scale. We can go down to that city scale, and then we can even go down to a hyper-local scale with individual events. One of those events that our purple air sensors was able to pick up was the pulse fire that happened or the GRTC fire that destroyed a bus back in May. And so those are things where those are local events, whether it's maybe a fire or maybe fireworks, maybe grilling, traffic, all of those events, all of those things we can see on our purple air sensors because, well, they're tracking that data all the time. The other thing we're doing, the other way we're collecting data is with the walkabouts that we're leading right now from the museum, but we'll eventually be going through other areas. This is a really cool, and these are a couple of really good pieces of information or context that we've been able to see, and some really interesting observations. Because the way we divided up our walks into two different kinds of routes. One route was going through neighborhoods, as you can see, leading from the museum, maybe into the neighborhood like the Fan or maybe the museum district, something of that nature, versus our other routes that are planned, that were planned for the going down Broad Street. We've labeled those as busy routes, the ones that go down Broad Street. The routes that go down into neighborhoods where it's a little quieter, maybe a little more green spaces, those are our green walks. Very easy labels. But what we see in in one of our collaborations with the iThrive program through UVA and Virginia Tech, we were able to see that particulate matter, there is a difference in the level of particulate matter that we see on the different walks. We don't know specifically what is in the air with the sensors that we have, but we're just measuring whether something is in the air. But we can reasonably say that based on historical data, those are aligned with what we've known before, whether it's a previous study, like the iThrive program had done a study a couple of years ago. And then we're able to say we can at least interpret, have conversations with other people, whether it's experts, the community, and say what these numbers mean and how we can then proceed with some good information. All right. So one of the reasons we need to know why we're doing this in the first place, as Jeremy has alluded to in a couple of ways, public health is something that's very heavily impacted by the air quality, and some of the conversations we're looking to have with our participants and with the community is to remind people that air quality is a really good indicator of public health, and things like PM 2.5 are one of the big factors that we know impact long-term public health in ways such as higher asthma diagnosis and other cardiovascular diseases like COPD. Here we go. So like I said, the two ways we're collecting data, the purple air sensors, which are stationary, constantly collecting data. The other method is through walks where our collaborators are meeting us out in the community, so that we can get that real-time data, where people are walking around and everything like that. One of these collaborations, as I've been talking about, was through a grant in collaboration with UVA and Virginia Tech, specifically talking about the impacts of urban design on our physical well-being. And one of the ways we were talking about that is through monitoring heart rate, or the variability in heart rate during these walks. One of the things that one of the trends that we've seen so far in our results is that the lower heart rate variability is associated with elevated stress, and our findings indicate that the urban gray conditions that are here. So the gray walks that we were talking about tend to be associated with increased stress levels, compared to the green walks. So that's just one of the highlights that we've been able to see. It's got us kind of excited about at least that really early conversation piece around what we're seeing. So this is just a little bit of extra context for what we've been able to accomplish so far. We've just been able to have, we've had a little over 40 now, at least, a little over 80 total participants. But as far as our iThrive walk was concerned, with comparing our green versus gray walks, this is just a breakdown with our demographics. You can see that our participants were predominantly white and predominantly female. That's something that is not necessarily good or bad from our perspective. We just said this is what we've observed, and we want to be able to share that with everybody so that there is a good context for what we're seeing so far. Let's see. So yes, then I got a little bit ahead of myself, but here is at least the general synopsis of our subjective results. And Jeremy, please jump in if I'm missing anything to make sure that everyone is keeping up with me as well. But the way this procedure went was when people came to the museum, they did a pre and post survey that was geared towards getting an idea, getting a look at people's mental state during our walks. So that was the variability in heart rate was one of the indicators that we used to look at changes in those stressors or changes in the results of those stressors. So the overall benefit, one of the big takeaways was that green space relative, like I said, green space relative to the gray space or the gray walks provided was less stressful on the participants comparatively. Now, hopefully, we'll be able to see the same trend continue, but we don't know. We just have to wait and see if that's the fun of continuing to do this and continuing to do this all together. But like I said, we see that there are benefits, at least in relation to stress. But what other benefits are there to having a better design around green spaces in our communities? You can see here there's just a pretty good job of summarizing lots of different ways, from helping animals to lowering heating bills to having more green spaces in the communities. Like Jeremy said, one of the things, an example of that is Mary's initiative to build more parks, to build more green spaces and parks inside. And obviously, there are lots of benefits to being mindful of the urban design and really having a balance with nature, because who doesn't like looking at a few more trees here and there, and birds and animals, all that stuff. So again, this is a bit of a kind of summarizing this in a different way. What we're right now, we've been looking at a lot of areas that have a lot of impervious surfaces, not a lot of green space. And we are looking, and then we're hoping to confirm our suspicions, at least, that there is a relation to those conditions, those urban designs where there aren't as much green space, to potentially worse air quality, and being able to, like we did with the urban heat island assessment, of saying, here are the results for our air quality study, alongside of the spaces that have more impervious surfaces, the spaces that have fewer green spaces, and take our information, to take the information that we've all been gathering together. Because remember, this is a community effort. This isn't just a science museum dictating anything. A large part of my role is to meet everyone, is to help us meet the community where they are, and say, here's what we've learned together. Here's some resources that we think could be helpful in improving that situation or creating a change that benefits the community. And we're here to support you do that. And that's a very large part of this, so that everyone can, and in addition to that, we want our communities to be as knowledgeable about ways to improve as possible. So that we want to be able we want the community to advocate, to say, we could use more green spaces, because we have been a part of an air quality study. These are the results that we found. These are the experts that we've talked to. Here are some suggestions that we as a community can put forth based on our new understanding of the environment that we've been living in, and the ways that it's impacted by either urban design or other factors. So a little jumbled, but to wrap it up, I do want to make sure to acknowledge all of our collaborators, or to thank all of our collaborators, and then to highlight the reasons again that we're doing this. So just kind of summarizing reminders of what community science is, and why we're here, the ways in which the Science Museum is here to help with community science, including my role. So highlighting the fact that this is driven by local knowledge, and we're working towards actions that are homegrown solutions, based on the things that we've been doing together. Being able to connect more from being able to connect to nature more, understand a little bit more of what's going on around us, all good things. But at the end of the day, we want our communities to be empowered to advocate for themselves. We want our communities to be empowered with the knowledge of, hey, I understand the sciences, or I understand the world around me a little bit better, because I have an active part in learning about it. That's a key component for our vision and the way we want to do this, and why we're doing projects like RVAir. So with that, sorry about that. Jeremy, is there anything that you want to add before we open up to some more questions?
Yeah, thanks, Devin. That's like big thing here is that we're super glad that, even during this really remarkable time, and unprecedented times that we're living through, the fact that we've been able to get this community science program off of the ground has been really, really exciting for us. We look forward to, in the next few months, some of the things to look forward to are, some initial results that a student from the University of Richmond was able to put together and submit to a paper or submit to an actual academic journal called Sustainability, co-authored by Todd Lookingbill at the University of Richmond, one of our collaborators on the original Heat Island campaign and the community science campaign for extreme heat. Also, we're going to be collaborating with Groundwork RVA on kind of like a teen engagement around these sorts of data, and what can we confidently say about those sorts of differences that we're able to observe. I think that there's a lot to be still understood about what some of those trends mean. I think, Devin, you mentioned that in the maps when we were walking along Broad Street. I mean, first of all, there's more traffic along Broad Street, so in general, you're going to have kind of more of those particulate matter pieces spun up either in dust off of the street or actual particles coming off of the tires or whatever it may be. But higher traffic generally correlates to higher amounts of particulate matter. But then also you mentioned that you saw a couple restaurants, and where their exhaust, or like if you walk past like a barbecue smoker or Chicken Fiesta, which has a chicken rotisserie, those kind of like pop out as little hotspots. So those are really like transient things and not necessarily directly related to like long-term exposure to these things.
Yep.
But yeah. So
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I wanted you to elaborate on that.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to say, and to that point, even down to smaller examples with just standing next to a car when it starts up. When I was testing out these sensors, I honestly didn't realize how much of a difference it would make. Again, to the point, to Jeremy's point, it's not a long-term exposure. However, it's something when you see numbers jump up on your screen from the car that you're standing next to, it makes you think twice as you're walking around, and it's a great perspective to gain and just to be a little bit more observant of the world around you. So that's something that I've personally learned as I've been going through this as well.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing about this community science program and what we're really interested in with the support from the Institute of Museum and Library Services is, do people start to view using these sorts of, tools, these scientific tools, to change their perspective or on the world around them? And so we're really excited to share more of this as it comes out. And certainly thank you to everybody for your attention. And we'll try our best to answer questions that you might have about it, and if we can. So thanks very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Dr. Hoffman, I wonder if you could real quick just kind of let everyone know, if they did want to get involved in these citizen science projects, what could they do?
There are a lot of different things that people can be doing to get involved. So first and foremost, I think Devin shared, if you go to smv.org/air quality, we have a portal for you to sign up to be a part of Devin's remaining air quality walks. The fall is quickly advancing. You feel the nippy weather in the morning these days. We certainly will try to keep those on the calendar, but certainly don't want to get in the risk of maybe slipping on some ice. So if you can't get involved this fall, Devin will still be reinvigorating this in the spring. Then, more broadly, there are a partner organization called SciStarter. And if you go to scistarter.org, you can learn about a bunch of different citizen science and community science programs that are going on in our region. One that we participated in was a bio blitz using what's known as the iNaturalist app. This is something that you can use on your phone to just go outside. You see a weird bug, take a picture of it in the iNaturalist app, and it'll help you or identify what that is. So we're hoping to expand the offerings that we can make in other aspects of community and citizen science. But right now, we're really looking for folks to contribute to this project and become involved in either hosting a safety sensor at their house or becoming involved with Devin's walkarounds.
All right, thanks very much, Dr. Hoffman. I did post the link to SciStarter in the chat. All right, so with that, I want to thank Mr. Devin Jefferson, Dr. Jeremy Hoffman for presenting for us today. So thank you all for joining us, and thanks to our speakers for helping us discover more about our world. So please join us next week, October 14th at noon. Each talk is free to attend and is open to the first 300 registrants. Thank you again for joining us today. Until next week, stay safe and stay curious.